Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahawashi, Bahasham, Rakaha Kudash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. And those 10 horns are speaking of the EU, or European Union, beginning with the first 10 common markets of the EU, back when it was known as the European Economic Community. And the beast is NATO, and the whore is talking about the United States of America, which is biblically known as Babylon the Great. Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, at the beginning of this chapter, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, nuclear fire, because contrary to popular belief, when World War III really kicks off, at some point during it, America's European and NATO allies are going to turn against her and ally themselves with nations like Russia and China, and they're all together going to shoot 200 million nuclear missiles onto the United States of America, turning it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. And in this video, I'm going to go into 2 articles from Breitbart.com to show the reasons that are going to lead to why the 10 horns upon the beast are going to hate that whore and eat her flesh and burn her with that nuclear fire. And the first article from Breitbart is titled, Global Food Crisis, Russia Threatens to Limit Vital Agri-Supply to Friendly Countries Only. And this whole situation going on in Ukraine is definitely going to put a further division between the U.S. and her European allies, because while they're in unison right now in putting sanctions on Russia, these European nations stand to lose the most and get hurt economically the most due to those sanctions on Russia, as we're about to see. A Russian government official has threatened that Russia will limit its vital food exports to only nations it considers friendly, i.e., nations that aren't putting sanctions on them. Nations that aren't building up a military presence upon their border. Dmitry Medvedev, a senior Russian security official who previously served as the nation's president, has threatened that Russia may soon cut off the West, a Western Europe, the United States of America, from food exports. A major player in the global market for wheat and other agri-food products, Russia will instead focus on keeping itself fed, according to Medvedev, alongside supplying its friends and close allies. Posting on his Telegram, Medvedev said that cutting off the likes of North America and the European Union, those 10 horns, from its agricultural produce would be a very good way of retaliating against sanctions imposed by the West. It so happened that the food security of many countries depends on our supplies, the Russian official wrote. It turns out that our food is our quiet weapon, quiet but ominous. The priority in food supplies is our domestic market and price control, he continued. We will supply food and crops only to our friends. Fortunately, we have a lot of them, and they are not all in Europe and not in North America. We will sell both for rubles and for their national currency in agreed proportions. So not only is Europe facing a food crisis due to them going along with the United States of America to put sanctions on Russia, but they're also facing a natural resources crisis because Russia has also been threatening to cut back their sale of natural gases and other exports to Europe, which relies much more heavily on Russia for natural gas and other natural resources than the United States of America does. And what have we also recently seen? Russia saying that, look, if you European nations or really any nations want to get natural gas from us and other resources, you're going to have to start paying for it in rubles. Hey, a lot of these sanctions are beginning to backfire on Europe. And again, this is further going to lead to Europe eventually turning against the United States of America and allying themselves with Russia during World War III to shoot those nukes onto the U.S. We will not supply our products and agricultural products to our enemies, he went on to say, and we won't buy anything from them, although we haven't bought anything since 2014, but the list of products prohibited for import can be further expanded. Medvedev's threats echo others being made by the Russian government, such as that reportedly unfriendly nations will soon be forced to pay for a variety of Russian resources, including the country's much sought after gas exports, in rubles only, or be cut off from supply completely. According to Politico, the ex-president's comments come only a day after the Russian government put limits on sunflower oil exports, as well as outright banned the export of sunflower seeds and rapeseed. And I read an article the other day showing that due to them putting limits on sunflower oil exports, the chip manufacturers in Britain are expecting shortages in chips, and they're also having to look for alternatives to sunflower oil to make potato chips over there. Even before this ban was announced, foreign nations had been feeling the pinch in regards to sunflower oil supplies, with panic buying being reported in Germany and shortages affecting traditional chip shops in Belgium. However, some officials seem convinced that these minor inconveniences will pale in comparison to the disastrous crisis that will occur as a result of a lack of agri-food exports from Russia and Ukraine. For me, it's not whether we are moving into a global food crisis, it's how large the crisis will be, said one expert. Yara International head Svein Tor Holsether, whose company specializes in fertilizer. Half the world's population gets food as a result of fertilizers, and if that's removed from the field for some crops, the yield will drop by 50%, he explained. So due to these European nations following after the United States in wanting to go against Russia and also being bullied by the United States and to take more austere and stern measures against Russia, they're looking at food shortages, fuel shortages, a whole host of issues, which is going to heavily affect them, their economies, and their people. Another expert from the United Nations has warned that Europe in particular, those 10 horns, will soon face hell on earth migrant flows if it does not act soon with the food shortage in the global south as a result of the ongoing Ukraine crisis being likely to start another migrant crisis. And Europe is already dealing with the previous migrant crises due to the Syrian civil war, the Libyan civil war, the war in Afghanistan, etc., etc. And what was the main causes for most of those civil wars? The U.S. pushing for those wars in those countries, and then these European nations getting dragged in on the side of the U.S., which in turn led to these migrant crises, which are currently affecting Europe much more than the U.S. Just another reason for those 10 horns upon the beast to hate that whore. That's it with this article. But now I'm going to go into my second article on Breitbart, which is dealing with this possible migrant crisis due to looming food shortages. And we know that food shortages and famines are coming as well, as according to biblical prophecy in Matthew chapter 24, as well as 2 Esdras chapter 16. But the title of this article reads, UN Director Warns Europe of Hell on Earth Migrant Crisis Amid Global Food Shortage. A senior UN official has warned that Europe must either pay for more food aid abroad or face a hell on earth migrant crisis. Pay for the food of the developing world or face another migrant crisis. This is the ultimatum the head of the UN's World Food Program has put to Europe's leaders. The dramatic warning comes as the global organization begins to struggle to pay for the food it gives to famine-stricken parts of the world, with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine disrupting food supply globally and by extension driving up prices, all a vicious circle coming from this war in Ukraine. Now, according to a report by Politico, the food program's head has warned that its project is in jeopardy and that Europe either needs to cough up more funds for the UN group's mission or face a terrible migrant crisis. We're billions short, said World Food Bank Executive Director David Beasley. Failure to provide this year a few extra $1 billion means you're going to have famine, destabilization, and mass migration. If you think we've got hell on earth now, you just get ready. The former governor of South Carolina continued, if we neglect Northern Africa's coming to Europe. If we neglect the Middle East is coming to Europe. However, Beasley was keen to stress that it is not just a migrant crisis that Europe is running the risk of with the ongoing food crisis. The former Republican politician painted a picture of mass unrest in Africa, Europe, and the United States as a result of the ongoing crisis. What do you think is going to happen in Paris and Chicago and Brussels when there's not enough food? He asked. It's easy to sit on your high horse in your ivory tower when you're not the one starving. Beasley's dire ultimatum, while no doubt quite a bit more graphic than warnings made by other officials, are mostly in line with the future predictions of other experts. Ukraine, nicknamed the breadbasket of Europe, is responsible for a significant share of the world's wheat production, with both it and Russia holding about 30% of global market share in the grain. Both countries have significant roles in the production and exports of fertilizer too, without which crops yields could be reduced by up to 50% in Sweden, for example. However, due to the ongoing conflict, exports have largely ground to a halt, with Russian ships reportedly blocking Ukrainian ships from accessing the Black Sea and supplying the world. The combination of these factors means that a global food crisis is likely on the cards, with many experts now warning of famine in parts of the world that are more at risk. For the last 3 years, global rates of hunger and famine have been on the rise, said Michael Fakhri, the UN's special rapporteur on the right of food. With the Russian invasion, we are now facing the risk of imminent famine and starvation in more places around the world. So that's it with this article. But as we can clearly see, things aren't going to be looking too good for Europe in the foreseeable future. From food shortages, fuel shortages, having to pay for Russian resources in rubles, and a looming migrant crisis, Europe's about to feel the brunt of yet more U.S. adventurism abroad. Because ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's really been the U.S. that's been pushing for these Eastern European nations to join NATO so they could build up a military presence right on Russia's border. And it's no different with Ukraine, hence why Russia has done their special military operation in Ukraine to blunt the advance of NATO and the U.S.'s advances on their border. And again, this is all ultimately going to lead to Europe's allies turning against the U.S. at some point during World War III to ally themselves with Russia to altogether shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles onto the U.S. These European nations can only take so much bullying and antagonizing from the U.S. before they snap and lash out at the bully. But now let's get back into these precepts. This is Daniel chapter 2. I'll start at verse 40. And this is dealing with the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had of that statue of that man of different metals that the prophet Daniel interpreted for him. And these were dealing with the different kingdoms of the heathens that would rule before the kingdom of heaven. You had the head of gold, which was the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire, the breasts and the arms of silver, which is the Medo-Persian Empire, the thighs and the belly of brass, which was the Grecian Edomite empires, the legs of iron in Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, as it says, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. And this is speaking of the ancient pagan Roman Empire, also ruled by the biblical Edomites, who are known as the so-called white people today. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And now we're going into the last leg of the fourth beast, the current heathen system we're in, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, also ruled by the Edomites. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, and that part of iron are the stronger nations in the last leg of this fourth beast, such as the United States of America, Britain, France, Germany. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and that miry clay are the weaker nations, which are usually referred to as the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. But the main point I wanted to focus on in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41 is where it says, the kingdom shall be divided. And as we saw from all that information we read in those two articles from Breitbart.com, there are several looming crises coming to Europe, which is going to further drive division between the iron toes mixed with miry clay. Again, food shortages, fuel shortages, a migrant crisis, etc., etc. And this is all going to culminate in those 10 horns upon the beast, hating that whore and burning her with that nuclear fire. America's European allies turning against her and allying themselves with Russia and her allies to altogether shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles onto this place, turning it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then that desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope your sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong, as we can clearly see we're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites, those iron toes mixed with miry clay. So as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.